Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm really excited to have this panel for the Football Pride Online Festival. And I am really grateful to Professor Bruce Kidd and Dr. Satoko Itani to find some time from different parts of the world to join me in discussing um, the regulations of football that deals with quote unquote gender verification. Today's topic is could football do what World Athletics couldn't? Discussing the gender verification regulations in football. So we have in the recent years been discussing the athletics regulations, World Athletics, initially in 2014, the hyperandrogenism regulations, which was challenged by an Indian sprinter, Dutee Chand. Interestingly, both me and Professor Kidd were very active in bringing that case to Court of Arbitration for Sport, along with the legal team and some other experts as well. Then recently, obviously, a very talked about case that was brought to Court of Arbitration for Sport by world champion athlete Caster Semenya, which is now the decision by Court of Arbitration for Sport is being reviewed by the Swiss Federal Tribunal. While there has been a lot of discussion on athletics, we thought it's a great opportunity for us in this festival to discuss football and how football can do better than athletics officials. So that is why we have come together with Professor Kidd, who obviously doesn't need an introduction. He is a former Olympian. He has been an advocate for gender equality in sport, has been a great support to all the work that I have done in the last decade. I couldn't have done without him. He has been the head of Commonwealth Advisory Board on Sport, which is interesting, and which is why I feel it will be interesting to hear from him about what the International Olympic Committee or the Commonwealth Games Federation can also do in order to ensure a safer playing field. I'm delighted to have my friend, Dr. Satoko Itani, who has written extensively on gender and sexual politics in sport, and a lot of recent articles written by them is in Japanese, actually. So I haven't been able to read them, but I'm really excited that there is a great bit of literature on gender and sexual politics in Japanese language. I believe, and Dr. Itani could help me, it would probably be able to confirm that in Japanese women in sport, gender in sport literature, this is probably fairly an emerging area of research. So what they is doing is quite interesting. So I will start with my first question, which is quite quite generic, is how would you like to see sport? As in, if you want to sort of see something that's inclusive, what is this idea of inclusive sport? I will start with Dr. Itani.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me to this panel. It's a great honor for me to be here and speaking to Professor Kidd and Payoshni, my friend. So to your first question, I think I can answer to this in a few different ways, because the sport is everywhere in our life. It is, right? Sometimes we experience it in educational setting, we experience it in a recreational setting, but some are elite athletics, right, elite level, professional level. So my answer would be different a little bit, because elite sport is because of the nature, it is already exclusive. However, when it comes to a gender inclusivity, um, the discussion to the sporting world really needs to open up to the reality of people's lived experiences and the diversity of gender that in the world, right? The rules have been written extensively, mostly by the Western medical authorities or the sports authorities in the West, based on this Western way of thinking about the gender, which is very binary. But more athletes, activists, and scholars, right, coming forward and say, no, physically, psychologically, and in anything in between, like there are way more diversity in gender. And then the sports cannot be just the only exceptional place the gender remains in the binary way. So I think that's where I want to start the conversation.
Professor Kidd, would you like to add your thoughts?
First, I want to thank you for this opportunity to participate on this very important topic, very timely, and to see both of you by this remarkable technology. I would add to Professor Itani's argument by saying that every person in the world ought to have the right to participate in their chosen form of sport and physical activity. And to ensure that, we need to reform funding, we need to reform the rules, we need to reform the way that programs are provided. And because women and girls are disadvantaged the most in all of the ways that they live, in addition to anti-discriminatory provisions, we need to look at the conditions in which women and girls find themselves and ensure that childcare is available, to ensure that employment is not so abusive and under-remunerated that they can't participate, and ensure that the public institutions of the school provide opportunities in an equitable way. And ultimately, we need to do that in a way that makes sense to the girls and women involved. And providers, as Professor Itani said, have generally come from a first world medicalized approach, and they have assumed that they know what everybody wants to do. The first thing we need to do is to start asking people who are not already engaged in sport what they would like to do and how they can be helped. These pandemics that are raging around the world today, the COVID-19 pandemic and the pandemic of racist police violence and the protests that have followed them, they've raised the hope that we can make the world better, that we can throw some of the old practices out and create a number of reforms. We need to reform the world of sport, not only at the elite level, which will probably be the focus of much of this call, but particularly at the grassroots level, to ensure that every person can exercise and can play in a way that fits in with their preferences, regardless of gender, class, sexuality, ability, and so on and so forth. And we're going to be talking about the United Nations later today. The United Nations proclaims that. The International Olympic Committee proclaims that. But we're a long way from actually delivering on that.
I think I'm glad that you raised United Nations while you were speaking. And we had the OHCHR, the Human Rights Council of the UN, publishing a report very recently, just a couple of weeks back. And that was focused on gender and race, and especially the DSG regulations of the World Athletics. However, the same report mentions FIFA's gender verification regulations and calls upon not only state actors, but also sports federations to revise, review, and revoke such regulations. Um, what are your thoughts on them? Who would like to go first?
Well, the FIFA regulations are just terrible. They give they require every national federation to conduct gender tests upon athletes with no direction, with no provision for the protection of athletes, with no limitations. You've made the comparison with World Athletics. I think in a way these are worse because they can be used as a stick to beat any athlete that is unpopular or raises questions and so on. I raised this with a FIFA official at the Play the Game conference in Colorado Springs last October, and he told me that while the regulations are objectionable, it's unlikely that FIFA would ever vote to abolish them because they give national federations enormous power over their athletes. And he said, in homophobic countries, they give officials a way of eliminating LGBTQ athletes from their teams. So I can't imagine a more objectionable rule in any international federation. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights reports calls upon states. I mean, I think everybody in the world who's concerned about human rights in sport ought to read this report. It is such an indictment of the international sport community. It essentially says that world sport is a human rights free zone and that international federations again and again and again abuse the rights of their athletes and their members. It calls upon member states to correct that, and that's a big ask. But as you say, Dr. Mitra, it calls upon the international federations to do the right thing. How do we get the international federations to do the right thing? That is going to be a big challenge. It will take popular pressure. It will take pressure from governments. It will take pressure from the UN. It will take media embarrassment. It's going to be an uphill fight.
I agree with you, but I also think we have come a long way in the last few years, especially because of the resilience shown by some athletes in the field of athletics, in the field of track and field. I believe the debate has always, the media attention was always on the body of the athlete, and finally it has moved from that to these governing bodies. So there is a lot more scrutiny of these governing bodies today than we had a few, even a decade back. And I think that has been possible because of these exceptional women athletes like Caster Semenya or Duti Chand. Having said,
and
sorry.
researchers like you doing the research, talking to athletes, publicizing the horrible conditions. No, it's a commendable part of the correction.
Thank you, Professor Kidd. Dr. Itani, what is it about the OHCHR report that has come only a few weeks back? Do you find interesting or remarkable?
Yes, I think it is very significant that this report came out from United Nations, right? The body that's, when it comes to human rights issues, that is highly respected and have a long standard of human rights, right? And as Dr. Kidd just mentioned, we would need a big pressure in order to make these big sport governing bodies to change their policies. And if anybody could do it, I think United Nations could be one of them. But again, as both of you have mentioned, the resilience of athletes who have stepped forward and really endured all these painful years of media embarrassments and harassments and somewhat death threats, um, um, really spoke up. And the researchers like you, Payoshni, really took up the voice because of the nature of this gender, right? This is so fundamental to our life. But because it is this, our society is so organized around who, like the understanding of who we are and how we relate to the world and how we are able to exercise our rights is also often entangled with this gender. And because of this, the shame attached to disqualified from sports because of their gender, it is really huge. There are so many athletes just because they, right, they didn't meet this scientific whatever criteria. They base most of the athletes in the past. I have read literatures, right, who have like every major in every major probably event in the past, however many years, there are athletes, at least one or two probably, who have disappeared from the world of athletics because of this. And that's where like this at the beginning of this conversation that has been long silenced because of this, exactly because of this shame attached, is really important. And the points that the United Nations brought up, I mean, this this OHCHR report brought up are in a way a basic, you know, it is talking about the basic human rights of integrity, of privacy, of like freedom from torture or unnecessarily, right, the intervention, medical intervention, etc. And this is like a really should be a wake-up call to the sporting, like sporting world. Like these something that we really agreed upon in most countries in daily life. If we hear about the freedom from torture or unnecessarily, right, search and like a medical intervention that's not necessarily for your health, yeah, people would say, of course. Somehow we cannot agree on this in the sporting space. But really this report set the conversation back to a really important place that people should be, regardless of their gender or athletic status in that sense, should be free from these violations of rights.
Yes, very true. Having said that, I mean, are we hopeful that sport governing bodies are really going to act, you know, because the OHCHR is recommending that they must? Are we, you know, are you hopeful that something may change?
Well, I'm not hopeful, but I'm hopeful about. I'm not hopeful that they will do it voluntarily, but I'm hopeful with the exposure that you and colleagues are providing, with the new athlete activism that we see in many sports all around the world, with the interest of the Human Rights Council, and with the responsibility of member states, that we can slowly put pressure upon the international federations and bring about change. It will be, and I think that these are early days, but the report gives us a roadmap on how to do that, to lobby nation states, lobby intergovernmental bodies, and really start embarrassing the international federations. I'm not sure very many people realize that FIFA is worse than World Athletics. I think
it is true because of the name. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the very fact that they still call it gender verification regulations is something that World Athletics and the International Olympic Committee were able to sort of undo. You know, in 2011 when the hyperandrogenism regulations, and in 2012 when the IOC published the hyperandrogenism regulations, it clearly said that gender cannot be determined. Now, whether or not they really believe in it is a question mark. It's a more complicated answer that, you know, World Athletics, even though they say that on paper, whether they really believe in it because of the way they have been dealing with the athletes at this point. But having said that, even on paper, FIFA looks really outdated. FIFA's regulations look really, really outdated.
And, you know, they've made some changes. I mean, Play the Game says that of the international federations, you know, whole list of governance indicators, they're the tops. You know, over the last 10 years, FIFA has made major strides to clean up its act. So let's hope that with the appropriate embarrassment and the clear evidence that, as you've documented so comprehensively and so frighteningly, the injury and humiliation and economic hardship of athletes affected. Let's hope that we can slowly put pressure on them to abolish, not change, abolish this pernicious regulation.
I think, Dr. Itani, you were also talking about disappearing athletes, and I would like to go into the idea of athletes disappearing. And that was also possible because of the idea of confidentiality, privacy, in some ways attached to it. But that whole clause of confidentiality, which is on one hand important, do you really think that that has helped athletes, or that has really protected the federations from being monitored by outsiders?
May I answer? And I think this is a very complicated issue because, right, there's so much information about the athlete's body and about their gender come out as a result of this testing should be protected. It is, I mean, it shouldn't be searched from the beginning, but when it was searched, this should not be made public without athletes' consensus. And athletes should be consulted with the concept, like what it means to disclose these informations and even what these information even mean to them. I often have to question, right? And then the athletes sometimes talk about how they didn't know what they were tested for, and et cetera, et cetera. But yes, I feel like I think that the organizations are using this rhetoric of protecting athletes' privacy to not disclose this egregious human rights violation that they are committing. Yes, I agree with your point.
Professor Kidd, I feel, if I'm correct, you have been writing about actions that the IOC must take, or the FIFA or the World Athletics must, take in order to ensure that there is a safer playing field. Would you like to talk about your interactions with FIFA a little more?
Well, there's not much I can say other than I have written, both bodies. In the case of the IOC, to ask for an undertaking that there will be no sex testing for anyone involved in the Tokyo Olympics. And in FIFA's case, to ask them to abolish this regulation. And I haven't heard back. The mail system must have broken down between Europe and Canada. I haven't heard back.
And how long have you been waiting?
A very long time. In the case of the IOC, through you, I know that they are considering these issues, but we are we're frustrated by the lack of clear response. In FIFA's case, just don't know. So this is very timely, and I think that we need to, and thank you for this prompt, I think we need to step up the pressure.
While we have been discussing the regulations and the UN report, I think I need to bring in the fourth person who was supposed to be part of this panel, but because of where she is currently and where internet is not not really easily accessible. We had to record it earlier, a few days back. I have recorded an interview after several attempts. In fact, the interview is not very clear, which is why we have subtitled the sections where this particular woman footballer, whose name we are not going to disclose, when she spoke, because of the connection, it wasn't always clear, so we had to subtitle that section. I will move on to probably sharing the video of my interview of this woman footballer, who has been subjected to testing very recently on the basis of the FIFA gender verification regulations. I'll ask my friend, Dr. Itani, who's way more technologically advanced than I am, and to share the video.
Okay.
And welcome to Football versus Homophobia panel on FIFA regulations. Thank you for joining me.
I said thank you too.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me. I was asking you, am I right that very recently you have been dropped from the national women's team's camp?
Yes, I was dropped from the national women's team because I was intersex.
Right. So there was a medical test. During the medical test, who was there?
And there was a medical doctor, and before I went to the coach to check up.
Okay. So was it just a physical examination, or there were blood tests or other tests involved? Hello, are you there?
Okay.
Okay. So you just told me that you were at the women's national camp. You went to see a doctor and also your coach, and they did a physical examination.
Yes. And they did a physical examination.
Right. So if you can tell me what happened on the day of the medical test. Can you tell me one by one what happened on the day of the medical test?
The doctor called me to check out whether I'm a man or woman, and they found I was intersex. So because of that, so I can play for the woman team or women football again. And before they sent me to the coach for physical checkup.
So when you did your physical examination, was it with the doctor only,
Yes.
or was the coach also there?
The coach was also there.
So, and can you tell me what tests did they do?
And they tell me to take off my clothes, and they see whether the thing and the intersex was
the voice was not very clear, my dear friend. Can you please repeat your answer? I'm sorry that I'm making you answer the same question again and again, but the connection is not very clear.
like the doctor and the coach tell me that I should take off my clothes to check whether the intersex was strong.
Okay. And after that, they asked you to leave the national camp?
Yes. And I should go and do a surgery before I should play for women football again.
Can you tell me what tests did they do that day?
They did a physical examination.
Okay. Hello? Can you tell me if they gave you any document, anything in writing?
No, nothing. They just say I should go home.
They gave you no papers, nothing in writing. They just said you should go home. Now, what happened after that? You went home? And what happened after that?
And hello?
Hello, I can't hear you clearly. Okay, I will ask you specific questions. So, the doctor and the coach, after the medical test, said that you must leave and you must do a surgery to be able to compete in the women's category. Am I right?
Yes. Yes.
So you went back and you said you went to a hospital. Was it a hospital that the doctor and the coach sent you to?
No. Well, because of they say I should go home and do surgery, so I went to a hospital only myself. It's not a coach. Me and my mother, my parents, we went to a hospital.
Right. Why did you go to hospital? What was it? Why did you go to the hospital? To know if you want to do the surgery, or was it because of something else?
He said,
I can't hear you clearly.
because this.
So once they dropped you from the camp, you went to the hospital to know more about what surgery you needed to do, right?
Yeah. Hello?
Yes, if you can tell me, why did you think you needed a surgery? Was it because the coach and the doctor asked you to do a surgery? Is that why you thought you needed a surgery?
Yes. Because of what they told me, that's why I want to do the surgery, no?
Okay. And if you were told that you can compete with women even without any medical steps like surgery, would you still go to do a surgery?
No.
So you went to the hospital to find about a surgery because you feel that to play sport you need that to do a surgery. Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Because of that.
Can you speak?
Hello?
Again? Yes.
Yeah, because of that, because I want to compete with women, that's why I want to do the surgery.
Okay. If you are told that you don't need to do a surgery and you can compete with women with the same body that you have, will you still want to do the surgery?
No, I don't want to do.
So the only reason for you to do the surgery is because you feel that otherwise you will not be allowed to compete with other women.
Yes.
Before being told that you need this surgery, did you ever feel the need to do a surgery or go to a doctor for this reason?
No, I don't feel to go to a doctor or to do any surgery because of how I was dropped from the national team that I was to do a surgery before.
So right now, are you training? You're not competing. Are you training? Are you still training?
No, I'm not training.
Okay.
Because because they say I will not compete with the women, so I'm not training with anyone. I just stay home doing nothing.
Right. And how did you feel when all this happened to you, when you were suddenly tested and they asked you to leave? How did you feel about it?
I feel sad. I feel sad. I feel unhappy because of I was able to compete with the national team, and now I was able to compete with the women. But because of that, so they say I should go home. So I was very sad.
Do you feel your future is uncertain now?
Yeah.
I just wanted to know, how important is football for you?
Yeah, football is important for me.
Were you able to earn some money through football?
Hello?
Were you able to
Please again.
were you able to earn some money through football as well?
Yes.
So do you have any other ways of earning money at this point? Can you hear me? I'm asking if you have any other ways of earning money. Do you have any other job?
No, I don't have any other job.
Okay.
Only football. I just trust, and uh, I just put my thoughts and my trust in it.
You want to play football, you want a better future, but as of now you feel that you will have to do the surgery if you want to play football. That's what your national camp doctor and coach have told you.
Yes.
But this is a surgery that you believe you wouldn't have done if you were not so keen to play football. Are you am I right?
Yeah. Because of that, so the team I play, they say they will not allow me to play any to compete with women again.
Is there anything else that you would like to share with me?
Oh, no, is I want to compete with women, and I want to get into sports again. That is the only thing, because now I feel sad and I stay home doing nothing.
Thank you so much for taking time out to speak to me for this football versus homophobia panel that I have organized on FIFA regulations. It is very important for us to know and understand that what a particular athlete is going through at the time when she is dropped from the team. Thank you so much for joining me, and let's stay in touch. Is there anything else that you would like to tell me or share with our audience?
Oh.
Hello? I think we will.
Oh, no, that is all.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And let's stay in touch. Thank you. I will stop the recording. And it's
it was not easy to do the interview, but the footballer was very keen to do the interview, and I'm glad that we were able to speak, even though we had a lot of disturbances. I hope with the subtitles it is kind of clear what she has been going through in the last few months. Do you have any thoughts, any questions for me, just in case you need any clarification, just in case it wasn't very clear?
May I ask one thing? Also, like in a private conversation, this came up, but this athlete was forced to or had to agree to go through a surgery. And has she gone through a surgery as a result?
No, she has been told by the doctor and the coach that she can only return to women's football after undergoing a surgery. The interesting thing in this case that you will note that she says that the only test that has been done is a physical examination. So that there has been no comprehensive tests. Even if we go by the regulations, they do sort of talk about different kinds of examination, including USG scan and blood tests, etc. Nothing has happened. Just on the basis of a physical examination, she has been asked to leave the national camp and has been told that you need to do some surgery. There is no clear information. And there is the other thing that is very clear from the interview is that she doesn't have any paper. So the idea of informed consent, so she has no paper, no prescription, nothing in writing from the team, from the national federation, the national team doctor, or the national team coach about her suspension. So it's completely orally done, and there is one no informed consent initially. It's kind of ad hoc how the tests are being conducted, and also afterwards there is no paperwork. So it kind of leaves no trail of all that has been happening. And this is not, and then with my experience of working with athletes as well as footballers in recent times, I can confirm that this is not a one-off situation where you have something like this. The idea of informed consent, the idea of confidentiality, all these things that federations, international federations keep talking about are actually not maintained at the national or regional level. And even though the international federation should be responsible for for these kind of things, because after all, what these national federations are doing are taking guidelines, reading these regulations, and then trying to implement it in their own way. So if there were no regulations, these violations at the ground level wouldn't have happened. So there is a responsibility of these international federations. If they have such discriminatory regulations, this is bound to happen at the ground level. No informed consent, no document, no medical records, anything being given to her, no letter of suspension, just asked to leave and go home. And this is a national level play. And it can happen at any level to people who are much young. And how are these international federations, which otherwise talk about human rights, all kinds of rights, how are they going to ensure safety of young women and girls who are in sport? Any thoughts, Dr. Itani or Professor Kidd?
I would like to ask you, Payoshni, because these sometimes surgery or sometimes hormone therapy, these are very complicated procedures. And even me who read this documentation quite often, it is complicated. It takes extensive scientific knowledge. And this is not even the concluded science, right? How is your sense of these athletes' understanding of what they are agreeing to? like even if there hasn't been a document, so that's very like it is like it is no consent, so that's the fundamental problem. But even if they were given this document of right what their diagnosis might be, do you think they would have fully understood? Like,
often they are in different languages, which or often they are not explained, even if there are papers given. You're right, Dr. Itani. And also the other thing that is important here is what the compulsion that she keeps saying. And I have kind of tried to ask her over and over again that would you go to the hospital asking about a surgery, a possible surgery, otherwise? And she says very clearly that if they had not asked me, if they had not told me that surgery is the only way I can return to sport, I wouldn't have gone for that. So the compulsion to do a surgery or take any kind of medical steps just to compete, just to participate in sport, is something that is very clear from this story. And that is something that athletes go through. I'm glad that she's taking time to make her decision. And I'm glad that I've been able to put her in touch with other athletes who have been in this situation, and can guide her through this particular moment. Having said that, the fact that sport makes her feel that she's inadequate in some way, which she never felt before, the fact that sport makes her feel that she needs to change her body in a certain way, take medical steps, irreversible medical steps, just for participation in sport, which she never felt that she needed to do otherwise, is an important point, an important thing that is coming up from this story. And that needs to be highlighted and told directly to these federations. They must understand what they are subjecting these athletes to. Any comments, Professor Kidd?
This is a very upsetting story, following on many similar stories that you and others have uncovered over the last few years. These are unnecessary surgeries for healthy women. As the World Medical Association has said, they're completely objectionable, and they can well cause lasting change in one's physiology, hormonal balance, sexual function, and so on. So there are huge violations of their human rights. And as you say, they are in a situation where they're virtually compelled to undergo such procedures if they want to retain their livelihood and they want to stay in sport. So it's just horrifying. What we don't know is the number of women who've been chased from sport for these reasons. My mind is going in several directions right now. I think the most important thing is to persuade FIFA to stop, to give athletes an understanding that they don't have to undergo this, and to establish a system of reparations, financial reparations, for those who have already been excluded and harmed in this way. I think that the national governments have got to be involved, and I would think the overall multi-games governing bodies like the Commonwealth Games Federation and the IOC has to be informed by this. These are delicate and difficult tasks, but there's an urgency to them. that this interview illustrates so profoundly.
Yes. And the fact that the FIFA regulations say that national governing bodies must actively investigate, um, uh, which is not the case with the World Athletics, where a lot of responsibility is actually taken by World Athletics. I'm not saying that helps anyway a lot in, because if there are these guidelines, they are going to be used and misused at a national level. There are several concerns about the regulations of the World Athletics, and I'm not going into that because we are focusing on football today. But the fact that FIFA says that the national governing bodies, the national football associations, are supposed to submit, and they must ensure, they must actively investigate and ensure that that the athletes of the team are of appropriate gender. One, they're trying to determine gender, which is, of course, absolutely outdated. But on the other hand, they're giving too much power to the national federations. And national federations across the world act differently in countries where there are not very, where laws are still not very supportive as far as, human rights is concerned, as far as the rights of LGBTIQ people are concerned. In those countries, there is obviously the risk of footballers going through even worse kind of experience is possible. So given that, the fact that FIFA gives so much responsibility to the national governing bodies, asking them to actively investigate, what would you say to that? Dr. Itani?
Can I think for a moment?
Yeah, sure. Professor Kidd, would you like to speak first?
Well, I mean, the strategic question is how do you identify which agency is most likely to correct this? I think you need to appeal to FIFA. You need to appeal to other bodies. But the real difficulty for us is how do you get effective implementation compliance? FIFA is the logical one. It's their rule. They have the resources. They have the communication power or the communication capacity to do this. And they seem to be moving overall in a progressive direction. So they are certainly a candidate for doing this. Can we get FIFA to appeal this regulation? That would be the logical thing. And then following appeal, they need to follow up with national bodies and your help to identify all those athletes who've been driven from the sport and harmed by these medical treatments, and help them restore their lives. They have an obligation to do that. But can we get FIFA to do this? That's the big question.
I'm Dr. Itani, do you want to come back?
No, I think Professor Kidd made more points than I could.
So I was, I'm also worried about, while I'm worried about the fact, because I've seen it, having worked in India very closely at the ground level, I've seen the scope for misinterpreting these regulations and misusing them, using them at their own whims. And at the end of the day, it's the athlete who's suffering the most, because athletes do not generally know that they have rights to appeal against them. Now, FIFA has a regulation, and when Professor Kidd, when you're talking about appealing, why do they need to appeal against their own regulations? They can simply abolish their regulations.
That's what I mean. Repeal.
Repeal.
Repeal. Abolish.
Yes.
Finish.
And
what is the, I mean, I think what the big challenge raised by the Human Rights Report is that there has been this long, several century tradition of the autonomy of sport. And the feeling that sports bodies create their own laws. And people go into sport to feel that they can do anything that they want. And volunteers feel that they're empowered to do what they want. And I think first is to abolish this FIFA regulation and begin a process of reparations. But we also have to, create the expectation that international and domestic sport has got to be human rights compliant. And we've got to create mechanisms to hold sports bodies to human rights. And I think that, for me, that's the campaign for the next, the next number of years. Because as this report indicates, sport has seen itself as outside of human rights, to the great harm of many athletes and many other people.
Are athletes not human? Is the question. They are struggling with.
You know, as a former athlete, I would say athletes are among they're exemplary humans, and they deserve the same rights as everybody else. They're not soldiers subject to martial law. They're citizens that deserve every protection of the long established human rights. And you know, what's interesting about the United Nations is every one of the major documents around human rights discusses sport. You know, the Convention Against Discrimination Against Women, the racial discrimination, the rights of the child, persons with disabilities, indigenous people, they all mention sports. And yet the sports bodies act as if those eloquent proclamations of rights don't cover them.
Go ahead, sorry, I interrupted you.
Go ahead.
Before going to my last question to both of you, I would actually like to ask you, Professor Kidd, about the Commonwealth Games Federation. You have been the chair of Commonwealth Advisory Board on Sport around the Glasgow Commonwealth Games, I believe. And do you think the Commonwealth Games Federation or the Commonwealth Secretariat can do anything positive to anything that, you know, set an example probably on this issue, as we are expecting the IOC to do, but obviously we have been waiting for a long time for them to act. Do you see the Commonwealth Games Federation doing any different?
Well, first of all, the Commonwealth Advisory Body on Sport advises Commonwealth governments and the Commonwealth Secretariat. It can advise the Commonwealth Games Federation, which it does, but it has less clout with the Commonwealth Games Federation. I will say that the Commonwealth sports ministers are strongly seized of this issue around the autonomy of sports, and meeting after meeting after meeting hears complaints from member governments about efforts to bring domestic or national sports bodies under national law, only to have those bodies go to the international federations or the IOC, which beats them up. And so, although it's a complicated issue, they are very much apprised of this. And this is another, for instance, which could be brought to the Commonwealth sports ministers. The CGF is also, I think, an important candidate for this campaign, although football is not a Commonwealth sport. The CGF, under Louise Martin as chair and David Grevenberg as the CEO, are pushing their sports federations and their national Commonwealth Games associations in a progressive direction. And they're trying very hard to move Commonwealth sport in a more responsive, accountable direction. In particular, they're working to achieve gender equality within the Commonwealth sports. And actually at the Commonwealth Games in Gold Coast, Australia in 2018 were the first multi-games to have an equal number of events for women and men. And they're moving to bring the numbers of participants in the same direction. And they're also working on leadership. So they can be allies in this struggle. I would say they also face incredible constraints. Most of the, I'm sorry if I'm going on too long, most of the Commonwealth Games associations that field their teams are actually NOCs. And they are much more responsive to the IOC than they are to the Commonwealth Games Federation. So there are some challenges there, but I would think that, and you're in London, Payoshni, going to see David Grevenberg and Louise Martin, who has an apartment downtown in London, would be a good thing to do because they could be very sympathetic.
Thank you, Professor Kidd. My last question, I would like to quote from the regulations of FIFA, the gender verification regulations, as they call it. The two main goals of the regulations apparently is to ensure a level playing field and to protect the privacy and dignity of players. While the idea of protecting privacy and dignity of players is understandable, and I do understand the idea of a level playing field given doping is such a big concern across the world. But do you feel that in connection to the gender verification regulations, the goals that FIFA has set for themselves, which was set in 2011, pretty old, almost a decade old regulations, do you think their priorities and their goals are misplaced? And if so, what would be your friendly advice to FIFA?
Can I go first?
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, because both of you are such experts, I don't have much to add to all this after all this conversation. But I am in agreement with Professor Kidd for they must abolish this regulation. And that said, just because you brought up the doping, because I study about the gender and especially transgender issues, how this being outside of this normative gender or expected way of being or living one's gender is often seen as some form of cheating, or seems like they just cannot get out of this mindset where gender variation is cheating, something that should not be there, and they try to police it as if it is a doping regulation. But this is coming from the place of this very old way of thinking about this gender. I mean, there are only men and women, and it should be a clear boundary. And those women who do not fit into this category of weaker sex are somehow not women, and therefore cheating in the realm of sports. As long as they cannot stop seeing this living diverse gendered body as some form of cheating or the error or some kind of a medical issues, they will not have this productive conversation. So yes, the regulation must change, but also not just because this regulation is not independent of the society in a way that they are a reflection of the society and the value that we put into this gender life. We really need to have this conversation of, stop seeing the gender variation as some kind of a crime or some kind of cheating.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
I completely agree with you, Dr. Itani. I think there is a culture of suspicion and in as far as this particular issue is concerned. And one of the words that I come across quite often whenever I have to work with officials from any of these federations or big sport governing bodies is gender fraud. What does it really mean? And I think that is where you're very right, that their priorities will change only when their mindset changes. And that is where we need to work a lot more. Professor Kidd, would you like to add to that?
No, I would agree with that. It's not just enough to abolish the regulations. We have to change the culture. We need educational campaigns around this. There are some bodies like the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport, which conducts educational campaigns around this on the grounds which you've both well stated, that the whole culture of sport has got to accept that. The level playing field means that we accept all persons who identify as participants in a broadly defined diverse gender. In Canada, that debate has gone forward, but there's still pockets of athletes and sports bodies that persist in believing the most hoary, unsubstantiated, unscientific ideas. So you can never communicate enough. We need to also get that message out again and again and again.
I think it's a great note to sort of, conclude today's discussion, that we need to work on the mindset. Now, it's a different question because the way our sport governing bodies are structured, that whether are you at all able to change these people's mindset, or you need to sort of dismantle these structures altogether to able to have some kind of fresh thinking and progressive thinking in sports management. But having said that, I think let's be hopeful that there is a change in mindset which leads to some progressive change, and terms like gender fraud are wiped out from the dictionary of sport officials. Thank you so much, Professor Kidd and Dr. Itani, for your time, and I hope that our listeners will not only enjoy, but will benefit from today's discussion and will take it forward in different ways. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.